The protagonist, a young man, was a typical recluse after graduation. He didn't show much interest in the world outside his home. Instead of searching for a job or a girlfriend, he chose to live a solitary life. His parents were frustrated and tried all kinds of methods to motivate him, but nothing seemed to work. The protagonist was content with his life, preferring the comfort of his house where he could write novels online, even though it didn't make him much money. He wasn't interested in drinking or smoking, and since he didn't go out, he didn't need much money. Most of his time was spent indulging in his love for anime, comics, and games, making him a perfect example of an otaku. He often found solace in the words of a famous short story writer from his family, who had once expressed a desire to live in solitude, untouched by the changing seasons. The protagonist admired this idea, feeling justified in living his life in the same way. However, this behavior began to strain his relationship with his parents, and to avoid further tension, he decided to move to his old house in the village. Since his grandparents had moved to the city, the house was empty, and it offered the peaceful environment he craved. The village was a quiet retreat from the noisy city, allowing the protagonist to sleep late, write his stories, and play games without interruptions. However, there were occasional power cuts during the summer which irritated him as it disrupted his internet access. Despite spending an entire year in the village, he had barely interacted with anyone, except for the local women selling braised meat, who had become his only source of regular contact. His meals were simple, but they sufficed for his needs. Life had become routine, and the protagonist thought he might continue living in this way forever. One morning, as he woke up to the bright sunlight outside his window, the protagonist reached for his glasses, eager to continue a game mission he had left unfinished. However, when he put on his glasses, he was stunned to find that the world around him had changed. The once real three-dimensional world had transformed into a two-dimensional, anime-like world. Panicking, he discarded his glasses, but the world still appeared strange and unfamiliar. Without his glasses, everything was blurry, but even through his blurred vision, the surroundings felt real. Confused and curious, he picked up his glasses again, only to discover that the world remained in its new, animated form. He wondered if the glasses had somehow gained some strange power after all the time he had spent watching anime. Even more perplexing was when he tried on a pair of backup glasses which also failed to change the world back to its normal state. Reluctantly, he accepted the new reality and decided to continue his daily routine. He washed his face, brushed his teeth, and sat down to play his usual games, now in an animated world. When he went to buy food, he was startled to see his local vendor, who now appeared as an animated character. The change was so surreal that he had to squint to recognize him. On his way back, carrying food from the market, the protagonist walked past a small river. It was a peaceful spot, often visited by the children of the village who played by the water. However, that day something strange caught his attention. He noticed a message in front of him, reading, "There is a wild photographer in front. Please decide the countermeasures." Confused, he looked around and saw a peculiar, cat-like creature with a camera walking toward him. The cat was dressed in a cap and appeared to be carrying a camera on its shoulder. The protagonist wondered what this odd creature could be and what was happening in this strange new world he found himself in. The protagonist returned home and decided to check if there were any other strange things hidden in his house. To his surprise, he discovered a few odd machines that had appeared out of nowhere. One was a gasapon machine filled with colorful capsules, though he couldn't see what was inside them. Another was a vending machine next to the TV, but instead of selling drinks, it contained strange building blocks. The last was a small warehouse that looked like a doghouse, seemingly meant for storage. Curious, he attempted to use one of the machines, inserting a Chinese yuan coin, but nothing happened. It seemed that these machines didn't accept real-world currency. After searching his entire house, he found no special coins to use. Since he had no way to interact with them, he sighed and decided to leave them alone for now, hoping that when he woke up, everything would return to normal. Choosing not to dwell on it, he went back to his usual routine, playing games and sleeping as if nothing had changed. The next morning, he woke up early to check if the strange things had disappeared. However, the animated world he had seen through His glasses was still there. Strangely, his vision had also improved, and he realized he was no longer short-sighted. Though he wasn't sure whether to be happy or concerned, he decided to adapt. For the first time in a long while, he stepped outside in the early morning. Having lived in the village for a year, he had rarely gone out, and when he did, it was usually in the afternoon. His sudden appearance shocked the villagers, who were used to seeing him as a recluse. Even children followed him curiously, treating him like some rare creature. To scare them away, he suddenly turned and made a funny face which successfully sent them running. While wandering through the village, he noticed something unusual at the senior activity center. A small elderly creature, about 20 centimeters tall, was standing on an old man's shoulder, watching a card game. It looked like a harmless elder with a walking stick, knocking the old man's head whenever he played poorly. No one else seemed to notice the tiny being, but when the protagonist arrived, the creature spotted him immediately and floated over on a small white cloud. It spoke to him in a friendly tone, asking for a favor. The creature's walking stick was damaged, and it requested the protagonist to fetch a new one from the village carpenter. In return, it promised a reward. Though skeptical, the protagonist accepted the task, treating it like a game quest. However, there was no automatic navigation system, so he had to find the carpenter himself. As he wandered, he encountered other strange creatures but ignored them, focusing on his task. Eventually, he found the carpenter, a beaver standing near an old banyan tree. The beaver seemed lost in thought, muttering about his skills going unused. Without much interaction, the beaver casually tossed a tiny walking stick to him before turning away, sighing about his declining career. Returning to the senior activity center, he handed over the walking stick. The creature happily accepted it and immediately gave him his reward, a map and 20 mo coins. The coins weren't physical objects but appeared as numbers in the corner of his vision. The map displayed an animated version of the village, including icons marking the old creature and the carpenter. Some locations were marked with question marks, hinting at more hidden elements yet to be discovered. Excited by his new currency, he immediately thought of the machines at home. The vending machine required more mo coins than he had, but the gasapon machine was affordable. Deciding to test his luck, he used his new currency for 2 tries. His first prize was a birch hoe, while the second was an idle flower seed. He had no idea whether these items were useful or not, leaving him both excited and confused about his next steps. The protagonist examined the unusual seed and hoe in his hands, finding them strangely real despite their peculiar nature. His mind raced with possibilities. Could this seed grow into a living idol? Excitement surged through him as he searched for a flower pot to begin his bizarre gardening experiment. Fortunately, his grandparents had left behind several pots, though most were now filled with wild grass due to neglect. After selecting one that was only slightly damaged, he realized he had no experience with planting and struggled to figure out the proper steps. Without any guidance, he relied on guesswork, hoping the result wouldn't be an unattractive idol. Using the mysterious hoe, he dug a hole. The hoe, labeled as Beethoven's birch hoe, had odd effects supposedly enhancing musical talent in crops. As he tilled the soil, musical notes occasionally emerged before vanishing into the air. Only he could see this strange phenomenon. After planting the seed, glowing text appeared above the flower pot, labeling it as an idle flower, in good condition. Now all he could do was wait. Shortly after, a warning signal flashed on a map in his vision. A location previously marked with a question mark had changed to flower fertilizer refresh point, with specific collection times. Following the map, he discovered the fertilizer was located at public toilet. Despite the terrible stench, he endured 5 minutes inside, during which a progress bar slowly filled. Once completed, a tiny bag of fertilizer appeared on the ground. Though unsure of how often the plant required fertilization, he took the precaution of collecting it again later. Returning home, he sprinkled the fertilizer into the pot, immediately noticing an increase in the number of floating musical notes. The seed's status improved to excellent. Satisfied, he had nothing left to do for the moment and turned to his computer. That night, he dreamt of a beautiful girl appearing in his home, cleaning for him and preparing an extravagant feast with a mere wave of her hand. However, upon waking, he found no sign of her, only a pair of small underwear hanging outside. His life was undoubtedly changing, though whether for better or worse remained unclear. The first thing he did upon waking was check the flower pot. To his surprise, a small bud had already sprouted. The growth speed was remarkable, hinting that the arrival of whatever the seed would produce was not far off. He quickly gathered more fertilizer, ensuring he wouldn't run out. Outside, two elderly spirits, a dragon king and a beaver carpenter, were playing chess under the banyan tree in his yard. Unable to move the heavy stone pieces themselves, they cheerfully requested his assistance. He obliged, arranging the board and moving the pieces as they instructed. Though not skilled at chess, he could tell both were masters. After a tense match, the dragon king emerged victorious and left, while the beaver carpenter, frustrated by its loss, turned to the protagonist with a request. Needed a wooden chessboard to challenge the dragon king again and asked him to fetch suitable wood. Handing him a small axe, which enlarged upon touching his hands, the carpenter sent him on a task. Unlike his previous magical tools, this axe was entirely ordinary, a basic tool for cutting wood. Determined, he set out to complete the task, but his neighbor, the village chief, was startled by the sight of him carrying a sharp axe. Worried that the young man had lost his mind, after spending too much time indoors, the chief confronted him. Embarrassed, the protagonist reassured him that he merely wanted to gather wood for crafting, not cause harm. Still skeptical, the village chief led him to a specific area and pointed out a dead wild pine tree, granting him permission to cut it down. However, the lower parts of the mountain were privately rented, meaning he couldn't freely chop trees wherever he pleased. If he wanted more wood, he would have to climb higher. Given his current weak physical state, reaching the mountaintop was nearly impossible. Fortunately, the chessboard only required a small piece of wood, making the task more manageable. With no other option, he prepared to cut his first tree, stepping into a new, unexpected challenge. The task of chopping down a tree proved to be far more difficult than expected. Although the man aimed carefully, the axe often landed at odd angles, sometimes missing entirely. The force of the impact made his hands swell, turning red with pain. The old village chief watched with disapproval, shaking his head at how weak the younger generation had become. In his time, such a struggle would have been unthinkable. However, seeing the man's persistence, he decided to step in and help, making the task slightly easier. By the time the tree was finally cut down and its roots removed, exhaustion took over. The man lay on the ground, panting, unable to move. The village chief, used to such labor, loaded the tree onto his tricycle with ease. When the man regained some strength, he assisted in pushing the tricycle back to the village. Before leaving, the chief refused any payment, only mentioning that if more trees needed cutting, he could be called upon. The thought of repeating this task again was daunting, and the man jokingly wished for a healer to restore his energy before attempting such work again. Once the branches were removed, the man assumed the tree trunk needed time to dry before it could be used. However, the small carpenter creature had other plans. Handing over an ordinary saw, it instructed him to start cutting. Strangely, as soon as a section was cut, words floated in the air, labeling it as a chessboard material, and somehow it was already dried and ready for use. Then, something unexpected happened. The carpenter suddenly equipped itself with an astonishing set of tools, each one shining with an almost magical brilliance. These tools, labeled as top-tier crafting equipment, were unlike anything the man had ever seen. The temptation to take them was strong, but he quickly dismissed the thought. Attacking this creature would be foolish. There were only two like it in the village, and he relied on their daily tasks and rewards. With incredible speed, the carpenter worked, finishing a mini chessboard in under half an hour. The man watched in amazement, seeing two different realities, one through his special glasses, where the creature moved with incredible precision, and the other in the real world, where the wood seemed to carve itself as if touched by an invisible hand. The contrast between the two perspectives left him speechless. The carpenter, now fully engaged in its work, decided to construct something even grander, a pavilion specifically for playing chess. Originally, it was meant to be placed over a pond, but since the pond was empty, it was temporarily set up under a banyan tree. The man found himself dragged into yet another task. This new project required assembling delicate parts, but his experience with model kits made it an enjoyable challenge. Carefully, putting everything together, he built a beautifully detailed pavilion, complete with miniature tables and chairs. The craftsmanship was exceptional, and inscriptions were elegantly carved into the pillars, reflecting wisdom about victory, loss, and the passage of time. The name of the Pavilion of Wind and Rain, was etched above, giving it a poetic charm. The carpenter was pleased but insisted that the small pond should be restored soon, promising to build a pier once it was filled with water. Though exhausted, the man knew that more work awaited him. Completing this task earned him an ordinary axe, an ordinary saw, and 135 mo coins, far more rewarding than his previous quest. As he looked at the vending machine filled with mysterious prizes, his thoughts wandered to the possibilities. A comic studio, an animation base, even a game company, each one required far more mo coins than he currently had. The mere idea of owning these was thrilling, but earning enough would take time. He could only hope that more tasks would come his way, providing opportunities to gather the coins needed for his ultimate goal. The man never intended to use it for commercial gain, so he ignored the warning. The studio could create up to 300 chapters before vanishing along with the artist. It felt like a cheap imitation, but it was still better than nothing. Thinking about legendary manga artists, he remembered one known for constant delays. He had been a fan since childhood, yet the series remained incomplete. With this mysterious studio, he could finally see 300 chapters ahead. The only concern was whether this so-called artist could truly replicate the talent, not just the style. Excited, he requested the artist to continue the famous manga. The figure bowed deeply, then vanished in a puff of smoke, reappearing in the form of the well-known creator. The tiny figure entered the studio, but through one perspective the workspace appeared empty, while another revealed the progress, 1 chapter per day. Even the fastest artists couldn't compete with this speed. A button on the studio's roof allowed him to retrieve the completed chapter, either as a physical copy or a digital file, stored in a pen drive, though the pen drive had to be returned each time. Curious, he checked the first chapter. The artwork and storytelling were nearly identical to the original. Amused, he decided to share it online, claiming he had risked his life to steal the unreleased chapter. Many dismissed it as another fan creation, but curiosity got the better of them. When they saw the content, they were stunned. It looked real. Discussions exploded across forums. Some begged for more, others demanded proof, and a few joked about drastic measures to get the artist to continue drawing. As the night went on, another chapter appeared, convincing even more fans. The entire internet buzzed with theories and excitement, all while the man watched, entertained by how easily the world believed his creation was real. A strange rumor spread across the internet, claiming that a famous manga artist had been kidnapped by a fan and forced to draw new chapters of his work. While most people dismissed it as a joke, the real mystery was the source of the high-quality chapters being released online. The speed at which they appeared was unbelievable, with 1 chapter being released per day. Even the most dedicated fans couldn't tell if they were real or fan-made, as the style and storytelling were nearly identical to the original work. Some speculated that the chapters were stolen, but the artist himself confirmed he had only completed a few, yet 10 had already surfaced online. The discussions became heated, and when the chapters reached Japanese anime forums, they caused an uproar. Fans from both countries argued, with accusations of theft being thrown around. The controversy even caught the attention of the manga's official publisher, who eventually confirmed that the chapters were not official releases. Meanwhile, in a quiet village, a young man sat by a river, fishing. He was the mysterious poster responsible for the online uproar. Though his fishing skills were poor, his rod was exquisite, decorated with dragons and phoenixes. But in his eyes, the river held more than ordinary fish. It contained creatures from another world. Some had patterns like stars or unusual shapes, making it clear that this was no ordinary fishing trip. Catching these special fish was a challenge. A complex process required precise balance and timing to reel them in, almost like playing a game. The rarer the fish, the harder they were to catch. However, with his special fishing rods, unique ability to stun fish for a few seconds, he managed to secure a few. These fish could be exchanged for special coins or converted into valuable resources, making this more than just a simple pastime. It was a means of survival in a strange and mysterious world. The children who had been playing in the river did not return home immediately. Instead, they gathered in the yard, a place they once treated as their playground. Ever since the man returned, they had avoided it, finding him mysterious and a little intimidating. But after seeing him by the river a few times, they realized he wasn't as scary as they thought. Slowly, they returned to playing in the area, fascinated by a newly built pavilion. It was small and beautifully crafted, almost like it was meant for tiny people. The little tables and chairs inside were equally exquisite, tempting the children to take a closer look. However, they were always stopped, as those items were made from a special tree belonging to his family. Even the village chief was amazed by the craftsmanship, realizing that the man possessed impressive skills. Despite his father's past disappointment, it seemed expectations had been too high. The man was not as useless as he had once been thought to be. After completing a task that involved giving special fish to the beaver, he earned a total of 125 mo coins, which, combined with his savings, allowed him to use a special machine multiple times. However, he was unsure if the machine had a hidden mechanism that would guarantee him something valuable after repeated use. Just as he finished his quest, an old and powerful figure appeared, expressing delight at how quickly the fish had been caught. With excitement, he announced the start of a summoning ritual. The man was confused as he watched the strange event unfold. A pattern resembling a yin-yang fish was drawn on the stage, and the fish were placed onto the design. As the figure chanted, the pattern glowed, and the fish vanished one by one. A hazy form began to take shape eventually, revealing itself to be a new villager, a cormorant fisherman. This peculiar being resembled an old bird with a white beard, dressed in traditional fishing attire, complete with a conical hat, a straw cape, and a fishing rod. The man was surprised since cormorant birds usually caught fish by diving into the water. However, he quickly realized that this world had its own unique logic. The fisherman needed a home, and upon arriving at the yard, he quickly took an interest in a special tree. Although it seemed extravagant to use such wood for construction, the man agreed to let the beaver modify it. In just an afternoon, the master carpenter built a miniature house under the tree, complete with a tiny yard and even a wooden fisherman figure near a small river. With his new home completed, the fisherman officially became a resident of the village and began fishing by the river. By the end of the day, the man noticed a sudden increase in his mo coins, almost reaching 400. Originally, he had planned to use the machine multiple times, but the unpredictable results made him hesitant. Some items he had previously received had time limitations, making them less useful. Instead, he decided to save his coins to buy guaranteed building boxes from the vending machine, ensuring he got something worthwhile in the future. The protagonist discovered a new addition to the ACG world, a female human character who was a farmer. While she was not the ideal type he had imagined, it was still a step forward. The farmer, responsible for taking care of plants, required food and a monthly salary but was manageable within his current resources. However, upgrading her abilities would require building a cooperative association, which would be expensive. After setting things in place, the protagonist returned home, feeling content with his progress. His daily routine had changed significantly since he gained access to the ACG world. He spent less time online except for writing chapters and maintaining minimal interactions. Selling potted plants online seemed like a good source of income, but he had little interest in business. His plants grew quickly due to their special attributes, but once matured, they appeared normal, making it easy to sell them without raising suspicion. His real passion lay in writing. He continued to publish fan-made chapters of a popular series, gaining immense attention. His writing skills were exceptional, rivaling professional artists, and his release speed was impressive. Despite this, he remained anonymous, fueling curiosity about his identity. Various companies sought to recruit him, especially after receiving praise from renowned artists. Tencent Animations and Comics, among others, were eager to sign him, but all their attempts to contact him failed. Unbeknownst to the protagonist, multiple companies and fans were discussing his work. His inbox was overflowing with messages, but he rarely checked them. Eventually, noticing the rising attention, he addressed his audience, expressing gratitude but clarifying that he had no interest in becoming a professional artist yet. He promised to create his own work in the future, but for now would continue as a fan creator. This response satisfied fans, but companies were baffled by his lack of ambition. Despite this, he continued his routine, uninterested in commercial success.